Music and Rap with Dr. T and Tony. Welcome, one and all, with Music and Rap with
Dr. T
and Tony. And today, honey, we're talking about our book, Copacabana Sexcapades. We wrote this together.
We had a great time writing.
We had a great time writing this. As a matter of fact, JOAN MOLSON is going to be interviewing me regarding the book and my original St. Louis roots.
Well, we had a wonderful time in St. Louis when we went there.
Yeah.
This got back, and you were celebrated as a celebrity from the Italian Hill in St. Louis, and it was one of those great moments, I think, to renew your roots and then to have it recognized so aggressively and terrifically and so spontaneously by everybody. We had a very good time in St. Louis.
We had a great time. And the St. Louis Hill is very outstanding and very famous because Joe Garagio and Yogi Berra were born a block away from where I was born on Dempsey. And you and I went to Dempsey and you took pictures of Dempsey.
Walked you around.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a place, a repository of early Italian immigrants in the 20s who congregated it in that particular area and transformed it. And it hasn't changed all these years. Some of the most wonderful Italian restaurants in the entire country are in the Italian Hill.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, Joe De Gregorio, who is the very astute historian that took us all around.
He's the local historian for the Hill, right?
The local historian, and his father was a local historian, but he was telling us that these restaurants are so famous that even Oprah Winfrey drops by at least 4 times a year to go to that restaurant, Giovanni's. Wasn't that the name of it?
Fantastic. And we were at a couple ourselves that were terrific. And Joe De Gregorio is an interesting both a raconteur and a local historian, but he made me a member of this Italian bocce club. And when we were there was a bocce championship. Can you believe that? There were 8 courts, and people competed from all over the world. It was wonderful.
Yes, and it was right across the street from St. Ambrose Church, which is the church that I was baptized in. I mean, the whole thing was just so renewing and rebirthing. I got such a thrill out of the whole thing.
It was a great time. We had a great time.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you about Joe De Gregorio, honey. He saw our last show at M&N. He loved the way you play the clarinet. And he asked me to ask you, would you please play for him today something classical?
Something classical. And probably something Italian.
Probably.
Well, there's
Perché no?
Okay, no, but there's nothing more Italian than Puccini.
Nothing
And
more
so
Italian.
I think most people will recognize this. And I do a bit of improvisation with the Puccini. So. That's right, improvisation, Puccini and autumn leaves, and we call it Tosca leaves.
Bravissimo. Allora, and now we have Joan Molson interviewing, guess who?
Toni Carroll.
There we go. Take it away, Joan.
Never had no other boat. Has anybody seen Sam's girl? Now if you run into a 5'2", covered with fur, diamond rings and all those things, bet your life it isn't her. But could she love, or could she woo, or could she coo? Has anybody seen Sam's girl? If you run into a 5'2", covered with fur, diamond rings and all those things, bet your life it isn't her. But could she love?
Hello, I'm Joan Gainsleigh Mollison. Today on Joan's World, we have a treat for us. We're going to meet a celebrity. She's a singer, nightclub entertainer, recording artist, and writer. Toni Carroll. But before we start to talk to Toni, I'd like to show you some of her clips.
Gee, but it's great not to be in our place. Rocking my baby back home.
We have, I think, Barry Manilow singing the Copa.
Fantastic.
And can we do a few moves that you used to do in the old days? Yes, sure, I'd love
Okay,
to.
we're going to put you in the middle. It's very simple. We're going to do a sachet to the right, a sachet to the left, another one to the right, another
Sachet to the right,
and
sachet. I'll follow you, right. Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
Cue that music.
Cue that music. Right,
Left, right, left,
a step, kick, and step,
kick,
step,
hello.
All right.
On the right, on the left, on the right, on the left.
And a step,
Kick,
a step.
kick them higher. Hello. Hey, Barry, sing it to me, baby. Kick higher, girl. Hello. On the right, right, kick off. Kick. We're going to be right back in a minute. I want to thank all of you very much for being here.
Well, that was fabulous. You really had a wonderful career. Now, before we get into your fabulous career, tell me about your background.
Well, actually, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here today. I am already having a great time. I love your
Yes.
friends. They're all so talented and so
Yes.
patient. It's just fantastic. But I also wanted to tell you, Joan, that I did see Joe Franklin on your show, and
Yes.
also my neighbor, Arthur Tracy.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just love your show. You're terrific. You get everybody.
Well, you are, too. You're terrific.
Well, thank you. Anyway, when I was just a little kid from St. Louis, Missouri, I was always dreaming about the day that I could be in show business. And I think I shared this story with you that day that we were working on a movie together. Remember I told you how I got my job at the Copacabana?
Oh, yes, yes.
Well, anyway, the Copacabana at that time was at 10 East 60th Street,
Yes.
and it was the place to work. If
I
you-
remember.
If you could get a
Yes.
job at the Copacabana, your career would be made in a minute, and that's exactly what happened. So, anyway, when I was a little girl, I came from an Italian background. I came from a famous neighborhood, by the way, in St. Louis, Missouri. It's called The Hill. And it was made famous by Joe Garagiola and the famous baseball player, Yogi Berra.
Oh, yes, we saw them on the clip. Yes.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, so anyway, there I was in St. Louis, Missouri, and my mom was a widow, and I had two older brothers, but they never paid much attention to my mother, so I always took care of all my mother's errands and did things for her since I was 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Anyway, so how do we get into this story? But anyway,
Oh, yeah,
what
how you
happened-
got
Anyway,
into show business.
Right. Anyway, basically, it kind of started then because it seemed like I was always down in my mother's basement doing the laundry on Saturday afternoons, and she was one of these people that would like to have her laundry done the hard way and the long way, so I would start, like, 9 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you come down, I'm still doing the
I can't
laundry.
imagine you as a laundress.
I loved my mother. I would
Yes.
do anything for my mother. So lo and behold, it got to be so boring down there. So I started to read all the newspapers that were stacked away in the corner of the basement. And lo and behold, they were the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the Globe Democrat, the Chicago Tribune, and finally, you know, even the New York newspapers.
Yes.
And so, Joan, what I did, just to keep myself entertained while I was doing this laborious thing on Saturday afternoon, I would start looking at the theatrical section of every one of those newspapers. And as the years went by, I decided, oh, let me just do a little a scrapbook on everybody that comes from St. Louis, Missouri. And through the years, it ended up that there was a guy by the name of Doug Cowdy. He was the famous choreographer at the Copacabana, and he was getting more publicity in St. Louis than anybody else. So by the time I was 17 years old, I had a scrapbook that thick on Doug Cowdy. So, interestingly enough, when I grew up and I got into a good height and I was the right shape and everything else, I finally went to New York City.
Yes.
But by this time, Joan, I knew the city like the back of my hand because I've been reading about it in my mother's basement for so many years. And so I went directly to 10 East 60th Street, you know, like I owned the city. And I walked in this naive, inexperienced kid, and I said, I'm here to see Mr. Doug Cowdy. And sure enough, they went to get Doug Cowdy, you know, the choreographer of the famous Copacabana at 10 East 60th Street. And he comes and I've got the scrapbook, and I hand him the scrapbook, and I said, Doug, I said, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, like he's supposed to know me, you know. I said, I went to the Kreger School of Music, you know, at Boyle and Olive, you know where that is, and, you know, like he's supposed to know everything. And I said, look, I've been doing this scrapbook on you for years and years, and I just thought I'd bring it to New York and show it to you. And so he was overwhelmed, you know. He looked at the scrapbook. He couldn't believe what he was saying. But I was so naive, and I'm standing there, and I'm saying, no, what do you think, Doug? I said, do you think I'm pretty enough to be a Copa girl?
And he said, yes, of course.
And he says, oh, he scratched his head. He said, oh, he said, yeah, you're pretty enough to be a Copa girl. He said, but you're a little tall. He said, but don't worry. He says, we'll put you in the middle, and we'll get the girls to go down this way. And that's how I got my first job at the Copacabana.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, you've heard me say that I've led a very charmed life.
Oh, yes.
Now, that was the beginning of 20 years of charmed living.
Yes.
So then I said to Doug Cowdy, I said, but Doug, I'm a singer. I said, I've been practicing at the Kreger School of Music and everything, you know. He said, don't worry. He said, we'll get you in as a dancer first, and then you'll get to be the singer. And he was right. That's exactly what happened.
Well, how about, had you studied dancing at all?
Oh, yes. When I was back in St. Louis, I studied everything. I was very klutzy when I was 8 yeyears old.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I'm one of these females that finally shot up like this, and everything got to be in the right place at the right time.
You're 5'8", aren't you? Yes.
Yeah, 5'8". But anyway, I came from a musical family. You know that, too.
Yes.
And lo and behold, I used to love being in the family that I was in because everybody played an instrument, everybody sang, and I lived in this Italian neighborhood, and they all walked down the street singing, or if they were on a bicycle, they'd be singing to the top of their lungs.
Yes.
And I thought this is the way the whole world was, you know.
Yes.
And even my own mom, I told you about my mother, she had this wonderful voice.
That's right.
And everybody would come in this little Italian neighborhood. You didn't come in the front door. You walked all the way around, and you came in through the kitchen.
Oh,
and if you remember, everybody always had a big kitchen.
Yeah.
And they'd come in and they'd sit themselves down, and they'd say they came for a cup of coffee. But the truth is, they came to hear my mother sing. Is that adorable?
Wonderful.
And so my mom had one of these voices like Ethel Merman, you know.
Oh, boy.
And she used to sound like Ethel Merman. Because I was the opposite. I had this little soprano voice when I was a kid. And she would serve her coffee, and she'd sound like, they say that falling in love is wonderful. You know, and you could hear her straight up the street. We lived on Dempsey, which was named after Jack Dempsey, the famous fighter. And everybody would just come around and hear her sing. And with me, you know, I loved her, and I was inspired. Everybody sang.
So that's how you got your talent.
Well,
Yeah.
well, I kind of just fell into it. And as a little kid, you know, I was telling you this, that I lived in Milan, Italy, a little town
that's
called...
right.
That's
Yes.
right, Turbigo, Provincia di Milano. And then I was there with all the cousins and all the aunts and the uncles, and we all lived in one chalet under one roof. And then they were always walking around singing, too, but they were singing parts of arias, you know, and every time I was just maybe like 6 or 7 then. So and if I would open my mouth to sing, they'd say in Italian, "Be quiet, be quiet." And the more they said, "Be quiet," I would sing as loud as I could.
Yeah. So you got to the Copa, and after that you were in the Latin Quarter also.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the Copa, not only for me, but for all the stars that worked there, like Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, Frank Sinatra, and Joey Bishop and Danny Thomas. This was the springboard. Back in the 50s and the 60s, and finally they closed almost in the 1970s. It was a springboard. From there, you made it to the movies, or you made it out there to other parts of the world in the famous nightclubs or into the concert world. Our television, absolutely.
So tell us about some of the famous people you worked with at the Copa, some funny little stories about them.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, you know, what was really interesting and still stands out in my mind is these Copa girls were so young. For example, I was 18, but we had a gal there that was only 14.
My goodness.
But she was gorgeous. Her name was Norma Bartlett. She had the most magnificent face and beautiful long arms and gorgeous legs and beautiful hair, but she had the mentality of a 14-year-old. And we were all so naive and inexperienced, and after all, we were chosen for our good health and our good figure and our dancing.
Yes.
And so Norma had all that. And opening night, you know, we would spend 2 weeks rehearsing the routine, and then we would have these gorgeous designers design exquisite clothes for us, and we were clothes horses. By that is, we wore a lot of costume, and we wore a lot of hats with a lot of pins in them. Anyway, so this was opening night, and Norma Bartlett and I, we were already the dancing girls, and we were wearing beautiful mink hats. This was all real mink, beautiful mink tops, and then little mink panties, but then a gorgeous satin skirt that went like this, you know. And so we got out on the floor. This was opening night, and the girls got so nervous on opening night. The most unusual things would happen then. So we finally get out there, and Norma is just beside herself, and all of a sudden she opens up her skirt, and while the music is playing like this, and she forgot her mink panties.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, all of us were in shock when we peeked over her missing panties, you know.
Oh, my goodness.
And Doug Cowdy was on the lights. He was the light man, the choreographer and the light man. So he didn't know what to do with himself, so he kept lowering the lights. And it got to be so dark, and we kept saying on the floor while we were dancing, "Norma, you forgot your pink panties. Your mink panties, they're missing. You better get off the floor," you know.
Yeah.
So the lights got lower, and she finally found her way off the floor, but she did not have good eyes. She was always in a mess without her glasses, and she stumbled off the floor. But anyway, that was memorable.
Oh, that's marvelous.
That was memorable.
Marvelous.
But you know, opening night is nerve-wracking for everybody.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Red Buttons did the forward on the book. I interviewed about 120 stars from every one of those years, from 1970 all the way down to the beginning of the Copa days, which was 1940. Anyway, so Red Buttons wrote this wonderful forward, and so he always liked to talk about Julie Padell.
Oh, yeah.
You remember Julie Padell?
Oh, yes.
He was the boss at the Copa, and he
Yes.
was a tyrant, and everybody was afraid of him. He was built like a little Napoleon, you know, powerhouse of a guy. And as a matter of fact, he had an interesting kind of a charge to his personality. Like if you rubbed him the wrong way, I mean,
boy.
you never knew which way was going to be the wrong way. He would become explosive and violent. As a matter of fact, I even saw him slap a waiter one day.
Oh, my goodness.
And, you know, and I was just a kid. I never saw anybody slap anybody.
Oh, no.
But anyway, Red Buttons was their opening night. And he was scared to death because he had heard all these stories about Julie Bedell
Yeah.
and how crude and how cruel he could be. And sure enough, he did the first show, you know, and he got tremendous applause, and he was really a big success. And Julie Bedell never really was that nice to the entertainers, only if they were really, really top box office, you know. So lo and behold, what happened is that Julie Bedell got a hold of Red Buttons right after the show, and he said to Red Buttons, "You come with me." And so Red thought, "Oh my God, this man is probably going to fire me. Look how he grabbed my hand." And he took him into the kitchen. Now, Julie Bedell used to hold court in the kitchen because with the waiters and the busboys, you see. And so that was his little office. So this Napoleon kind of a character, he grabbed Red Buttons' hand, he held it straight up in the air in the kitchen, and Red was suffering from such jitters, you can't imagine. And he thought, oh my God. And finally he said, "Okay, everybody." Then he had this big ring, and he would always go like this, and all these little waiters and busboys would come to attention, and he's got Red Buttons' hand up in the air like that. And he finally says, "Okay, guys," he says, "a nice hand for a big star. Red Buttons is a big star." And with this, Red Buttons took a big sigh, and he said, "Oh my God," and I got rid of my jitters, and it was like winning an Oscar.
That's right, which he did later on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, Red Buttons did win an Oscar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's exciting to see all those people. Yeah, I saw Jimmy Durante there, and he started his act with a big toupee, a big wig, and when he took it off, he says, "Julie, I don't care how you don't like my bald head, I'm taking it off anyway," just to start his act. Yeah.
So he was talking to Julie.
Yeah, to Julie. Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you something about Jimmy Durante.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody loved Jimmy Durante. He was so good to the Copa girls. Well, interestingly enough, Jimmy Durante used to bring in more cash than any other entertainer at the Copacabana. He was really a moneymaker. And the other thing, when I went to interview all the waiters, they said that when Jimmy Durante entertained, everybody got a big tip.
Oh, boy.
Oh, they were. The guys would get in such a good mood.
Yes.
He would put everybody in a fabulous, very generous mood, and they were tipping everybody left and right.
Oh, yeah, he's known as a marvelous, very kind person.
Yeah.
I really loved him. Yeah, tell us a little more about your book.
Anyway, I wanted to tell you, these stories are all in the golden years of the famous Copacabana, written by myself. But anyway, I interviewed George Burns at this time when I was living out there in Hollywood, California, and he was so wonderful and so wonderful to me. This man had such a great personality. Of course, the whole world knows he had a great personality. But he was always so full of humor, and everything was poetry and humor and goodwill. He was just a wonderful guy. Anyway, so I called him up and I said, George, I said, "I'm writing this book on the Copacabana. I said, I'd like to interview you for the book." And he said, "Well, I've never worked the Copacabana." I said, "Oh, that's okay." I said, I just interviewed the stars that were sitting in the audience, plus the stars that were in the show.
Oh, in the audience, too. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, he said, "Well, what do you want to know?" I said, "Well, George," I said, "tell me." I said, "How did you," he said, I said, "How did you like the Copa girls?" He said, "I had them all." I said,
it's marvelous.
"George," I said, "how did you like Julie Bedell?" He said, "I had him too."
It's marvelous. Marvelous.
He was always just ready to be so witty
that's brilliant.
about everything. It was just unbelievable.
And how did you get from a Copa girl and Latin Quarter to being a recording artist?
Oh, okay. Actually, I had some demonstration records in between the Copa and the Latin Quarter Girl that got me my 7-year contract with MGM Records. But it was that period, and I'm sure, Joan, you remember, it was like the tippy end of the glamour era. See, a lot of your audience out there, they don't know about the glamour era.
No.
You remember that, don't you?
Oh,
I'm so glad that I experienced some of that.
Yes.
I mean, we get dressed up every night, especially the girls on the show, because the guys were all after us. I mean, I have to admit it. And we would go home every night and get dressed up, and we wear these gorgeous satin dresses with little spaghetti straps, and then we'd have our mink, or we would have a beautiful fox, white fox, and we were out to dinner every night. And you know, when I was interviewing Betty George, she was one of the stars of the Copacabana and the Latin Quarter. Beautiful girl. She now has a radio show up there in Albany, New York. And she was exquisite. She was of Greek heritage, and she had these great big blue eyes and beautiful, gorgeous skin and a smile. Her smile, I mean, they look like jewels from Tiffany's, and beautiful black hair. Well, the guys were really after her, I have to admit. So when I interviewed her, I said, how did you like the glamour era? She said, oh, I loved it, she said. I would have a date before the show, I would have a date between shows, and I would have a date after the show. She said one night she was out with Marlon Brando before the show, and the next night, and then at the next break, she was out with Bobby Evans, and after that, she would hang out with Walter Winchell. Now, your audience maybe doesn't remember Walter Winchell, but he was a famous columnist. And boy, he could either make you or break you.
If he said something was going to happen, it happened. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Or he could just say, she's a sensational singer. He could have a blurb at the bottom of his column, and the next day the Copa would be filled and the Latin Quarter would be filled. But anyway, there was Betty George. He would hang out. He would be the third date, Walter Winchell, and she'd hang out in a police car with him. And he used to like to pick up all the police calls, all the what was happening with the police department, because then that's how he'd find his news. Isn't that interesting? And I have a lot of intrigue about that in the book. But anyway, and then there was also, as I said, you know, this story about Joey Bishop. I remember I told you I wanted to tell you this. This was Frank Sinatra at the Copacabana, and Joey Bishop was the comic on the bill.
Oh, yes.
And Frank Sinatra had won an Academy Award in Hollywood, and so all of Hollywood was sitting there in the audience opening night. And Joey Bishop got out there. He's the comic opening up the show, and he got out there, and he looked at that audience, and he thought, I couldn't believe it. There were all stars in the audience. And with that, he looked up where the girls usually come down to the floor to do their act, and he sees this magnificent blonde standing at the top of the steps, a gorgeous blonde with a satin diaphanous dress, wearing a great big long white sable. It was Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, my goodness.
Marilyn Monroe was standing there in this star-studded audience, and Joey Bishop looks at her, and the whole audience knew it was Marilyn. He said to her, I thought I told you to wait in the truck. Oh, it's so funny.
I love that.
Oh, great.
Oh, but now, to get serious for a moment, before we leave, I would like to tell you about Toni's new CD, and it is called Toni Carroll, Celebrity. Well, Toni, it's been such a pleasure having you.
Oh,
and you
thank you,
must come
Joan.
back very, very, very soon, again, on my show. Will you promise to come
I
back very soon?
promise on one condition.
Yes.
That we have champagne the next
By
time.
all means, no problem.
Goes with the end of that wonderful glamour era.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming, and all the luck in the world on your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you.